now. So thank you very much, everyone, coming to the second instalment of the Deconstructing Immigration. The previous talk is now up on YouTube and is on our Facebook account and will go up to our website eventually. We'd like to thank Roger and Michael for spending their afternoon with us and talking to us. We have also put in the chat the PayPal link. I'm aware that there was issues with donating from anybody from Canada. So if you've not donated and you want to, then please go to the chat just now and the link is in there for donations for the talks. As I said, they were free, but so we can keep doing these sort of things, then donations are really much appreciated. So I will stop talking and I will pass you over to Michael and Roger.
All right, thank you, Siobhan. Good evening, everybody. I'm speaking to you from Mi'Kmaq, the unceded ancestral territory of the Mi'Kmaw people. I'm Michael Vance. I'm a professor of history at St. Mary's University in what the settlers call Halifax, Nova Scotia. And it's my great pleasure to introduce Roger to you this evening. Roger is the Mi'Kmaw Cultural Heritage Curator at the Nova Scotia Museum. My own research focuses on Scotian, and I first met Roger after I consulted on a BBC Scotland documentary on the voyage of the Hector. When I was researching for that particular film, I came across a photograph that was in the Nova Scotia Museum's online collection, Mi'Kmaw portraits, that depicted a large group of Mi'Kmaw men and women in traditional costumes standing. He's constantly engaged with the Mi'Kmaw community and is ensuring that he's sharing and adding to his knowledge. And in doing so, he's adding to our collective knowledge. So I think that's enough for me. I'd like to hand it over to Roger now. Roger.
Okay, I'm just trying to determine if I'm on mute. Am I on mute?
Nope, you're okay. Okay,
good. Yeah, my name is Roger Lewis. I'm a member of the Mi'Kmaw First Nation here in Mi'Kmaq. I originally from Sabaganagadek, which is probably 58 kilometers north of Halifax, a First Nation community of about 2,700 people. I started my career out as an archaeological researcher in support of treaty rights for the Mi'Kmaw rights people, and kind of drifted over here to the Nova Scotia Museum, and I've been here for probably about 15 years now, involved in a number of things. We do work with a number of people from across Canada and the United States, also from European countries as well, and a lot of academics, a lot of students. What we're basically, when I first came to the museum here, the museum was your standard type of Victorian museum. I used to cringe when I used to walk through that gallery, because sometimes I'd come out the other end and really question whether I was really here or not, and if I wasn't really in fact extinct, because that's the way those galleries were set up. And I think they were a little insulting to Mi'Kmaw people, considering the culture, and we'll get into talking about that in a bit. But we've taken that gallery kind of out of the dark ages, really, and put the humanity back into the culture, putting the humanity back into the material. And I think it's a greater story because it reflects and it talks about the resilience, the sustainability, and the vibrancy of the culture, rather than being a culture of primitive people. We really have to look at the cultural intelligences, I guess, of Mi'kmaw as a group and in its entirety. And I think we're making headway in that. We see a lot of movement in the context of reconciliation because of the history of the Canadian history, the treatment of Indigenous First Nation people in this country. There are concerted efforts. I think the museum is doing a wonderful job of that, really stepping aside. We're in the business of fabricating exhibits, etc., building exhibits, but we're not in the voice of being, or we're not in the business of being the voice of Mi'kmaw people. So what we did, we work very closely here with what we call a Mi'kmaw Advisory Group, a MAG group. And that group is made up of young, rising academics, scholars, artists. And some people do ask us, okay, why don't you include elders? Well, since I've been in this business, in this field, I've had the opportunity to speak with numerous elders throughout Mi'kmaq, and unfortunately, those people have all passed on now. So my position is these young people, 30, 40-year-old people are, they're our new generation of elders. So we have to work with them. They have to work with us to ensure that we're all going to be successful in promoting Mi'kmaw culture here in the province. But anyway, that's my story, and I'll be here for a while. We're in the process of, we just put a new gallery in. It's kind of related to this talk here today, what I'm going to talk about. And what it is, it's a collection of collections. We went beyond the Nova Scotia Museum, beyond our collection, and we invited non-Indigenous and Mi'kmaw people to bring their collections to the museum and to present them. And the messaging kind of behind that is museums aren't the only one that collect to preserve and protect culture, but private citizens, both, like I say, Mi'kmaw and non-Indigenous, collect for various reasons, and a lot of them are related, and there's commonality, respect for the culture, admiration for the art itself, the beauty, the complexity of it, and even the story behind it. So it's a wonderful exhibit. We have a permanent gallery. I'm in the process now called Epjalasi, which is welcome. And in that museum, or in that gallery, we're not going to have any hint of old Victorian type of gallery or exhibit display. It's very directed by Mi'kmaw people, and it's really fresh. It's a safe place for both Mi'kmaw people here in the province and non-Indigenous people. It's a place to share, to learn, and to be truthful and to be honest. And I think it's important for Mi'kmaw people to present their culture in a fashionable, proper way that is really reflective of Mi'kmaw culture and not of the museums or curators like myself. Mind you, I am of Mi'kmaw heritage, but I kind of clump myself in that museum group because of the simple fact that I do work here, and I try to set myself on to the side and just provide support to the Mi'kmaw advisory group when asked. And so it's going to be a beautiful exhibit up there, very contemporary. If you walk through the new exhibit we have downstairs, that's in response to the North American Indigenous Games that's coming to Halifax, that are coming to Halifax here in July. It looks at very early stone artifacts, etc., and ends with a very contemporaneous type of artwork that you would see in an art gallery. And you could see the progression of culture. It's a wonderful thing. And like I say, we'll talk about that in a bit. So we'll carry on with this. And thank you for the invite. Okay, Mike's there.
Oops, sorry. Yeah. So when we were speaking before, Roger, you were having discussion with me about the whole issue of the persistence of an adaptation of Mi'kmaw technology in the aftermath of the colonization contact period. We discussed the fact that there tends to be a focus on that contact period, as you indicated, the time is just frozen from that moment, as if this is the whole defining nature of the relationship between the settlers and indigenous people. I just wondered if you might want to reflect on that a little bit, about what kinds of ways in which Mi'kmaw culture has adapted in the wake of colonization.
Well, I think we're all pretty well conversant about the implications of immigration to Mi'kmaq shores. We don't have to debate that anymore. We know we know what the consequences of that were, and I think we can take a moment to reflect upon that. But I think the biggest thing we have to do is the portrayal of Mi'kmaq people here was always one of a primitive culture. It's been my experience here that's hardly the case. And when you do talk about, say, cultural intelligences and competencies, you can see that in the utilitarian and the commodified work that they're producing, artwork. And so what you see is the shift from utilitarian to art commodification here. And I think that's reflective of, like I say, the cultural kind of intelligence of Mi'kmaq people as a group. We see them portrayed in early Victorian art as the disappearing culture. You look at oil paintings, watercolors are always on the forefront during that early period of the 1800s. From the mid 1800s onward, they kind of drift to the background, like animals in a forest, because now the attention is focused on property and the selling of property here in Mi'kmaq. And but I think the culture is much more than that. We were talking downstairs, we were looking at stone technology, and we were debating down there the other day when I was talking with CBC radio gentleman Jeff Douglas, and we were looking at the stone technology, axes, arrowheads, knives, these kind of things, scrapers. And I kind of posed the question. I said, as a curator here, I often sit back and reflect about, had there not been any interference with this cultural group in what we call Nova Scotia now, what would have been the outcome? Because I think it's important for us to remember that Mi'kmaq people were really not a primitive culture. They had an economy, they had laws, they had governance, language, song, dance, everything a culture has and is necessary in a culture. They had it here, but sadly, it was that kind of sign of the times, or the age, I guess, of a period of settlement and stuff that kind of Mi'kmaq were presented in a very negative form, but I think if we look at their artwork, a lot of people here. Now, if we were to take a piece of Mi'kmaq work and we had it in an art gallery, it would be called a craft. But it's very much art, and you can see that if you look at a lot of the contemporary art. And I think it's brilliant. When settlers came here, they brought items that were beneficial to the Mi'kmaq. No doubt about that. But what they did is they took these items, introduced them into their own cultural practices, and the end result of that adaptation was something that stayed distinctively Mi'kmaq. And I think, Mike, I was talking to you about the Glengarry cap with Queen Victoria when she upon her coronation, and that was about the end of sail, the introduction of the age of steam. Tourism opened up here in now what we call Nova Scotia. So the Victorian period was popular, and the Glengarry cap was became a popular item here, but that wasn't lost on indigenous Mi'kmaq women. They took the Glengarry cap and they fashioned a Glengarry cap, but what they did is they took those caps and decorated them with beautiful, beautiful beadwork and quill work. And the result of that, kind of adapting the Glengarry and now adding the beautiful beadwork, the double curved motifs, etc. The result was something distinctively Mi'kmaq. And the Mi'kmaq people now, they would sell it to the tourist here, and they would call it a traveling cap. And a lot of these traveling caps, these Glengarrys, were bought and taken back to Europe. And I get numerous calls here in the course of a year from England and other places saying, oh my God, we have a beautiful chief's cap here. And I think it's important to have this hat return to the Mi'kmaq people. And so you're kind of curious what they do have in their possession. So I'll ask, okay, can you send me a copy or a photograph of this hat? And they're usually 100% the Glengarry cap fashioned with the beadwork. And I kind of chuckle because it was made for sale to them. And we see a lot of this in quill work during that Victoria period. You see a lot of embroidery work where decorations within the side or within a home were important. And Mi'kmaq would take that kind of doilies, and they would do quill work and they would do bead work. And what they were doing is mimicking pretty well European goods and influences, but they made them distinctively Mi'kmaq. And you still see that today. It's a lot of people probably here wouldn't know Jordan Bennett, who was a young Mi'kmaq contemporary artist. He came to the museum here, studied a lot of the Mi'kmaq material we have in our collection, and it influenced his artwork. And although it's very contemporary, very vibrant with very bright colors, there's components of quill work and bead work that are embedded in his artwork, an expression of himself as a Mi'kmaq person. And he's done a beautiful job with it, although it doesn't look out of place in a modern art gallery. You know it's distinctively Mi'kmaq. You see that with Mi'kmaq ribbon dresses, peaked hats, basketry, and in song. Mike, you and I were talking about a dancer. In fact, they have one of the largest international powwows in Halifax this weekend, and it's a competitive powwow. Powwow is a dance celebration song, etc., stuff like that. And the Gujawa which is a Mi'kmaw dance, will be introduce their Gujawa competitions. And I think I was telling you, we sat back and we were watching the Gujawa, and I'm convinced of what you're seeing in that Gujawa is a blending of, say, Scottish type of folk dancing and French Acadian type of dancing and Mi'kmaw. They've taken that dance and made it distinctively Mi'kmaw. There's no mistaking it now that it's Mi'kmaw, but you can see the influences there. And I think that's a story we have to tell.
Mhm.
It's a natural progression. It speaks of the intelligence of the culture and how vibrant and resilient and responsive are in the face of all the challenges they encountered the last 200 or 300 years.
Yeah, your point about the idea of confusing something that is actually an innovation as being traditional. So the Glengarry cap, it must be a chief's cap because it's embroidered with Mi'kmaw designs, but it's an innovation.
Yes.
And things that are in museums, not only in Nova Scotia, but all around the world, Mi'kmaw basketry work is an innovation. This was not part of the pre-contact tradition, the way it's presented for the consumer that materializes in the 19th century. And I think there is a kind of tendency, like you suggested, to see that as static, that this is the way it was done. It's been preserved ever since. But in fact, we've got this adaptation occurring in response to some pretty major transformation. I don't think we're denying the idea that the Mi'kmaw were severely displaced and that their economies were tremendously disrupted by colonization, especially when you think about the importance of the forest economy, forest and river economy to Mi'kmaw society. That really does get severely displaced. And do we see responses to that? I'm thinking, the idea of transforming woodcraft skills into hunting and guiding and turning that into something that can help to sustain communities. Do we see that reflected in the technology?
Yeah, you do see that. And I guess I should start. We have a number of petroglyph sites here in Nova Scotia at Kejimkujik National Park and National Historic Site, just outside of Kejimkujik National Park is a privately owned McGowan Lake that's owned by Nova Scotia Power Company, and the Bedford Barrens, where we have petroglyph, evidence of petroglyphs. And I think the danger is researchers sometimes, and non-Indigenous researchers, is that we tend to look at Mi'kmaw culture here as being very primitive and very static. But now the petroglyphs, myself and another gentleman from Wales, we looked at petroglyphs in the Atlantic region, and we've concluded now that the petroglyphs in Keji aren't necessarily pre-contact petroglyphs. What they are, they're observations and experiences of Mi'kmaw interaction with early French, loyalist planters, etc. Even the guides discovered that Nova Scotia was a beautiful place to hunt, great place to fish. They employed Mi'kmaw guides to take them into the woods. And there was a lasting legacy here for that 30, 40 years until it kind of waned a little bit. But these petroglyphs, like I say, they're observations and experiences of Mi'kmaw people during that latter part of the 1800s, early part of the 1900s, mid-1900s up until after the war, when things took a drastic change again, and Mi'kmaw populations were centralized from a number of communities in the province to two central locations, one in Shubenacadie and one in Cape Breton Island. Like that's how my people ended up in Shubenacadie. We're originally from the Digby Valley area, but they relocated my people, like I say, to Shubenacadie. But I think those petroglyphs are really, rather than trying or focusing our energy on trying to make these things pre-contact, which it was easy to do. But now as you get more technology, more information, now you realize it's like this, the objects we have in the museum collection, they're more reflective of a modern period of time. And I think the story we're talking about is the rise of commodity art. Is a wonderful story. There's no need to keep Mi'kmaw people, like you say, static and rooted in a past. This is a beautiful story to tell and to share with people. And you do see that in other aspects of Mi'kmaw culture that unfolded here, like you say, guiding residential school period. Although that was a very dark period of time here, a residential school place would be similar to the Irish institutions, etc. there. And but they produced beautiful ceramic work. And I loved it that the government really duped me. So I imagine how many other people they duped. They confused. They had propaganda photographs of Mi'kmaw children sitting around pottery wheels, etc., building these beautiful vases and things. And I spent a decade searching to no avail. And it was by accident that I stumbled across some of the ceramic work produced in an Indian residential school, which were of cats, dogs, bowls, little cups, etc. Something I totally didn't expect. But out of that dark period, there's again a positive spin to these stories, right? And it's I think it's really critical to telling the story of Mi'kmaw people, like I say, how it's sustainability of culture in the face of tremendous trauma, injustices, and hardships, right?
Well, as we know, the residential school system was a deliberate attempt to eradicate indigenous culture right across, well, North America, but certainly across Canada, and we're reckoning with that now. One of the things that's remarkable about the examples that you're giving is how culture in new and adaptive forms is an essential thread, whether it's Glengarry caps or baskets or ceramics in residential schools, that is what is attached to help keep some form of Mi'kmaw identity under intense assault. And it made me think actually about what's happening currently with Mi'kmaw youth and the ability to take the kind of technology we're using right now, internet, video, music, got obviously the cover of McCartney's Blackbird made it international, but that's just the tip of the iceberg when we're looking at cultural production now from Mi'kmaw youth. So there seems to be like a constant thread from the early contact period and settlement up to the present day as culture in its various forms adapted, that it carries right on through to the present. Do you think that that's a fair claim?
Oh, that's a fair claim, and you only have to look at it this weekend at that international powwow that we have over in Dartmouth on the other side of the harbor. Now they have 90 vendors at that event. And at one time, what used to sell for $1 is selling for $500 to $1,000. And it's become a really, and I think we were talking about this. I think it's brilliant. And they should be teaching it at business management schools, how you take a culture that was kind of confronted with all kinds of, like I say, challenges. And they have the ability to redefine their economy from a traditional hunt and fishing economy and says, okay, wow, if we don't do something, we might not be here. Well, they redefined their economy. Their economic base were settlers, populations. They produced things for, like I say, utilitarian, but also things for sale, and created a whole new market, rebranded Mi'Kmaw people and their skills, and marketed this. And it's a wonderful story. And I would often tell people, I don't know if it ever happened, but I think it's a wonderful story to tell in business management schools. I think it's excellent. And to do it today and to see now, this is very in demand art, something simpler from earrings to drums that it's just incredible to witness the demand for it. And I've been at cultural events and powwows where I've seen tourists just buying this stuff up, and they become so enamored with it. And we saw that during the early French period. The French became enamored with Mi'Kmaw material. After 1713, kind of the shift of political influences here, the British became equally enamored with it. Then the Germans became enamored with it, and it spread. And there's museums. We just brought a chief's jacket, repatriated it from New Zealand, or I'm sorry, Melbourne, Australia. And it was away from the community. Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful jacket. And here's a good example of this jacket is based on early French military jackets and French military jackets. And they were produced as such because the Mi'Kmaw wanted to be treated as equal as military officers from the French and the British forces that were here. That's that transition again. But they're distinctively Mi'Kmaw. People love them, but if you look at them, I had a curator from France here yesterday. We were looking at that Glengarry cap, or the Glengarry, or the cap, and we were looking at the Grand Chief's jacket, regalia. Says, oh my God, that looks very French or British. Ah, yes, perfect. But they turned it into something that's very beautiful. And I think that's what we have to start looking at these collections are. Otherwise, they were just labeled with a tag, ash basket, circa 1830. Now, if you talk about the progression of basketry, beadwork, quill work, you see we have a collection of beautiful, beautiful purses, beaded purses that were made for fashion. Now you see that again today happening all across Canada and the United States. Indigenous First Nation fashions are up here now than rather just a cultural kind of related commodity, right? And I think it's wonderful and beautiful.
And there's, as you're talking, I'm thinking about, this is something that for those that aren't in Nova Scotia might not be aware of, but this is sort of a general trend in Nova Scotia, full stop, of commodification of culture as a selling item. And probably our most famous effort in that regard is sort of the Celtic colors, emphasizing purportedly Scottish music in Cape Breton, and selling that as a commodity to come either by the recordings, or they can come visit themselves and enjoy a ceilidh. But the researchers who have looked at musicology, have looked at the Cape Breton sound, know that it's an amalgam of Scottish, Irish, Acadian, and Mi'kmaw forms, reflecting what's going on the island. So that is something that is being promoted as a growth industry for the province as a whole. But both kind of erase the older economy. When we're thinking about Cape Breton, it's coal and steel, the industrial economy. And one of the things that we haven't talked about so far is how the Mi'kmaw adapted to that new industrial economy that came in with settlers, because it is hard to find a distinctive response to that. We know they participated, but to my knowledge, there's nothing distinctive in terms of a Mi'kmaw coal miner or a Mi'kmaw lumberjack, but perhaps I'm wrong.
There were a number of Mi'kmaw lumberjacks, but I think what you're seeing unfolding here is the fact that you have a settler coal miner swinging a pick and a shovel. Well, that pick handle and that shovel handle were made with Mi'kmaw hands.
Right.
And so a lot of things in the industrial kind of sphere had a Mi'kmaw influence. There certainly were Mi'kmaw people that worked in the production of steel, in the trades, especially during the war. Mi'kmaw women as welders. And a lot of stories as such. But we have a museum of industry here in this province in Stellarton. I was there visiting one day, and it was very obvious to me as a Mi'kmaw person and a Mi'kmaw curator that, wow, when we're talking about industrialization of the province of Nova Scotia, Mi'kmaw clearly absent. Now, Mi'kmaw would take, we have such a thing as the Mi'kmaw crooked knife, right? Which is an adaptation of a European tool, similar to the bow knife, whatever they call it, with the hook on it. The Mi'kmaw crooked knife has a hook, but allows them to do things that they normally wouldn't do with a normal knife. You see when they're producing baskets. This is my favorite. This story is Mi'kmaw needed to produce baskets for farmers, for agriculture. It would take them 2 to 3 hours to build a basket by hand. So what did they innovate? They made like a pottery wheel and a mold of a basket. They could weave that basket in a quarter of the time. So whereas they were producing, say, a basket an hour, now they're producing 4. So you do see that industrialization and innovation in Mi'kmaw culture. And I like to say, I think that's just wonderful, fantastic. And rather than, we talked about the Disneyification of culture, the noble Mi'kmaw savage, right? Running through the woods with his tomahawk and stone axe or whatever. And I often tell people, if you want to talk about, if that's your intent, is to Disneyfy the culture, or even us as Mi'kmaw people, we're kind of guilty of that, Disneyification. So if you want Disneyification, subscribe to the Disney channels, right? You can download them for nothing. And but let's get on with the interpretation of culture in its proper form, right? I'm not that little cigar box Indians standing outside a store, right? Now, more than that. So culture is more than that. But we have to take that, and we have to be responsible for that too. We have to lead that way, right, in that direction. We're seeing it happen in academia.
Yes. Yeah. Yes. I think, all of the sort of, all the examples that you've given us and what we've been talking about sort of circles back to that point that you started off with about the notion that as you were walking through the museum, that this is all in a glass cases from the past. And that sort of fit into the whole idea that the Mi'Kmaw or any indigenous culture was doomed and would have to disappear. And this is all evidence that no such thing happened. That didn't mean that there wasn't trauma, that there wasn't dislocation, but there is a story of persistence and survival. And indeed, when we're talking about the cultural sphere, flourishing, not just survival.
Yeah, when I go to these cultural events like these powwows and these cultural fairs, and I see tourists paying $300, $400, $500 for an object that one time was called a craft. I kind of thumbs up and more power to you as a culture, right? You defined your niche in this. You're using your culture beautifully, right?
Yeah.
And people, oh my God, this is so beautiful. Look at the skills, the talent, and and it's just incredible. At one time there was they looked down at you, right?
Yes.
The gaze is up now. And I think it's a wonderful shift here.
Well, I think that might be a good point for Siobhan to see if she wants to, if there's any questions and maybe open it up a bit for a little bit more discussion. Siobhan?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Colin has been very patient and he's dying to get involved in this debate. So, Colin, on you go.
Hello, it's not Colin, actually. It's
sorry.
Colin and Maggie Ellis watching together. It's his name.
My apologies.
Doesn't matter in the slightest. I don't have a thing about that. But I wanted to actually agree with a point which Roger Lewis made, and that is there's a great danger in having academics do anything. I worked at the London School of Economics for 10 years, and I saw it happen time and again. Some eminent person got a grant, and boy, oh boy, it didn't matter what it was, they made jolly sure something was written about it. On one occasion, the person who'd done all the work was a young lady, and there was an argument in that department for 3 months, where the professor said his name had to come first on the publication, and she said, come on, I've done the work. So I think we all have to be careful. But that wasn't the point I actually meant to start about to begin with. I think it's vital that the Ullapool Museum use all the facilities you have available to you. 2 or 3 years ago, Neil, when he was president of the National Trust for Scotland, a fairly eminent organization, did a wonderful broadcast on television all about the whole thing about whether people were pushed to go to America or Canada, or whether they actually chose to do that. And what he showed in that program was that some of them had paid to go to America. They had chosen to go, and somehow that's rather ignored. I think it's vital that Neil's evidence, which was scientific, well-based, and well-versed, is taken into account when Ullapool Museum do its work. You are in a very powerful position, and
Yeah.
I encourage you to use it. Don't be fooled by these two chaps rambling on. The first international conference I ever spoke at was in Paris, and each speaker was given 4 minutes to talk. I'll tell you what happened if you were in 3¼ minutes time. Your microphone was turned off.
Yeah, no, we're very much aware of it. Actually, Michael was, as you said earlier on, was actually part of that documentary. So was Carly, who was in the last talk, and Marjorie, who is going to be hosting the in-person event in 2 weeks' time in the museum, was also part of that. So I actually realised until only a couple of days ago. So I was actually quite surprised. It's almost like a little reunion of that exact documentary that you were talking about. But I think it is. It's very important to talk about both sides. And I think from a Scottish point of view, is we kind of separate the kind of immigration from a kind of pre-clearance immigration and post-clearance immigration. One that was maybe slightly more destitute and one that was voluntary. And Neil does a really good job in that, and actually saying that we need to question this idea of voluntary, and how voluntary was that voluntary. And some of it was entirely voluntary, and some of it was maybe there wasn't a huge amount of other choices. So he does a really good job in that documentary of explaining the nuance between the two. So I think it's really, really important that we make sure that nuance is identified as at each step as we go along, and we kind of hope we're doing a reasonable job at that. As we go along this process. And that was kind of the point of the way we've set it out in the 4 different ones, and each is slightly taking a different view and slightly taking a different angle on it. But
well,
thank you very much.
I don't want to interrupt you, but I think Neil has always said he's very happy to talk to anyone, and he'd be delighted to talk to the Lochbroom Museum. Just I'll help you contact him.
Thank you very much.
I think you make excellent points. And if I could respond to the one about academics like myself, you're quite right. We don't have a good track record. And they've taken credit for, especially for the information that's drawn from indigenous communities, not acknowledging that you've been shared with you, not returning what you've learned back to the communities. That's all been seriously debated, and we now in Canada have to go through protocols to ensure that that doesn't happen. The other point, which is also an excellent one, is the sexism in the academy. Absolutely right. That is something that has been all too prevalent even during my own career, which is a mere 30 years old. So I agree with your points, and I think as academics we have to be aware of that past and make sure that we don't repeat those mistakes, or to the best of our ability. I will defend, however, the scholarship that we've done. So the nuance that you're talking about in terms of Scottish immigration, it has been done and it has been published. Many years ago, Jack Bumstead did a book called The People's Clearance, where he talked about this migration out of the Scottish Highlands. Was quite controversial at the time in some circles, but that this was a positive choice. And he also presented that research and published it. So yes, the criticisms of the Academy are appropriate, but we can't dismiss everybody's scholarship as a result of that. There's something to be learned. The problem is the connecting what the scholars do to popular presentation of the past, and that's where we haven't done a good job.
Thank you very much. If anybody has any questions, pop them in the chat. I have a couple myself, if that's okay, if you are happy to oblige me. So one thing I was quite interested in, and John had mentioned it a little bit last time round, and Michael, you kind of touched on it earlier, and it was this change in land that happened with the Mi'Kmaw, with the settlers taking all the river lands. And I was really interested to see how that affected the kind of technologies of the indigenous people, and did they then have to relearn how to farm and how to use the land because they were not on the riverlands anymore? They would be more in land. Either one you can answer.
I think
Well,
that's for Roger, yeah.
yeah, no, I was just going to say, yes, there were certainly a number of challenges, but I think Mi'Kmaw understood the challenges, and you know, there was a gradual movement away from primary rivers, now into the interior to the peripheral. And even there's settlement around, say, the city of Halifax and Dartmouth, the twin cities here, was always on the peripheral. But I think the ability to not so much isolate themselves, but to keep themselves independent in the face of all those other challenges that they're facing, allowed them to adapt, maybe not so much to agriculture, but to other things, right? And again, we see it unfolding today, where indigenous culture, one time when I was going to school, we had probably a paragraph of Mi'Kmaw history. We had half a book of French, half a book of British, and others. But I think now it's just that I think it always goes back to the resilience, sustainability of those cultures, that culture, and seeing it unfolded today in such a positive way. And took them a little to catch up to the primary players here, but I think they're, you know, like Michael was talking about the blending of Mi'Kmaw kind of musical traditions and with Scottish and Acadian. And you see at the East Coast Music Awards here, that's a major event in Halifax, and you see Mi'Kmaw drummers and chanters playing with traditional Scottish music. Mi'Kmaw
Right.
playing the traditional Scottish reels, right? But with a Mi'Kmaw kind of flavor. I think it's just wonderful for groups to do that. I don't know
It's
if
really
that answers the
interesting.
question.
Yeah, there was a kind of idea of, obviously it is incredibly nuanced, and there is good bits and bad bits about what had happened, and I think you've been really open and honest about how that one. What I was kind of curious about is how, to what extent do you understand that the communities are integrated? Is it there's certain bits that are integrated? Is it a partial one, or are they still quite separate with only crossovers in culture? Or what is the kind of environment of integration?
Okay, I'll give you kind of an example. In the 1960s, I was just a little boy when I became a Canadian citizen with the rest of First Nation people in Canada. My father and my grandfather couldn't join the Canadian military to fight in the two major conflicts. If a Native person had got an education, they would lose their indigenous status and recognition as a First Nation person in Canada. But unlike, we were talking about that this morning. We were talking about Acadian culture, Mi'Kmaw culture blending. If a Mi'Kmaw woman married an Acadian man, she was absorbed 100% into Acadian culture. Now, if a French Acadian man or woman married into Mi'Kmaw culture, they were absorbed 100% into that culture. But now you're seeing a blending of cultures now. It's more common than it was when I was a youngster. But I think what the beauty is you see a blending of both cultures and the practicing of like my boy, his grandfather was from the Orkneys. And of course, his grandfather on my side is Mi'Kmaw Mohawk. But you see the blending of these cultures. It's one day we were walking through a cultural fair and he sees the coat of arms for his grandfather. Right away, he knew what that was and made a comment about it. So you see, and I think that's the beauty of it now is there's no separation of cultures and stuff like that so much. It's a blending, it's a sharing. We've gone through kind of the ugliness of kind of civilization and cultures here. And like these cultural gatherings that I was talking about, they're free of charge, they're open to non-Indigenous people to come and participate. And so I think that's important.
So is the blending of the culture seen as a positive thing and not like a dilution and seen quite negatively? It's seen as a positive for the future.
Yeah, it's something positive that we're going to have to work with, right? We're in changing times, right? And one time when I was growing up, my little world was.
And Siobhan, can I interject one moment? Sorry.
Yes, on you go.
I wanted to interject about the technology, Siobhan, because I think it's important to remember technology is a very broad subject. Now, when the very early settlers went to America, they came across the indigenous community who were very good at technology because they use smoke signals to send messages to each other. They were very much better at communicating than the incomers were. And so they could be much more a community than the incomers, and the incomers suffered quite often because of it. So I think technology must be remembered as the broad topic it is, not just buzzy on computers.
No, that's right. Now I go out to schools and talk to grade 5, grade 6, grade 7 people. And we were talking about their grandparents on the non-Indigenous side, how they have a wood stove, they cut wood, saw wood, burn wood as a fuel to cook and heat their homes. And I was asking kids, I said, well, Mi'Kmaw had homes, they were wigwams. So they had to cook and they had to heat their home. How'd they do it? Kids said, we don't know. I said, well, they couldn't carry a big, huge tree into the wigwam, not big enough. So they had to reduce the wood into burnable pieces. And how did they do that? And these kids, again, said, we don't know. So I held this up and I asked kids, I said, what's that? They said, we don't know, it's a rock. I said, no. I said, okay, let me try this. I said, what's this? They said, oh, that's an axe, silly. I said, that's what your grandparents would have used. Yeah. I said, well, like I say, Mi'Kmaw had to heat their homes and cook. What's that? They said, is it an axe? That's exactly what it is. But the timing of our fates, right? And kids understand that. Now that's a good example of the progression of technology, right?
Yeah.
Still, one metal, one stone, same purpose.
It's a fabulous example.
What's that?
You just so happen to have them sitting there.
Yeah.
What's something you prepared earlier?
Yeah.
But I think that is fascinating. I think there's something we've got a very similar kind of idea when it comes to Scotland. When you're looking at the different types of housing that we had, was the old black houses were centuries and centuries of technology that the communities had fashioned and how to make them as economic as possible to keep the heat in. And then almost vanity took over and these brand new whitewashed kind of farmhouses became the fashion, and they were not economical in any way and were really, really difficult to heat. And actually looking back to past technologies is sometimes a better way to go, actually. It's how did they do it before? Because they spent thousands of years developing that and adding it and honing it to the best possible it could be before it was then changed for whatever reason. So it's something that it's something that's interesting, and we need to maybe take with us when we think about modern technologies.
Well, you know, I did my graduate work on stone fishwares. We're all familiar with stone fishware, suggested technology that's designed to impede the movement of fish for capture. And identified 4 types of stone fishwares in Nova Scotia, in the southwest part of the province. And now here's a river management strategy, a fishery strategy, a fishery plan that's thousands of years old. It was designed for instance, here there's such a word as nadugalim. Nadugalim is a Mi'Kmaw word that defines one's responsibility to the environment, to nature, and the resources that it provides us, is to take only what you need. And I think those principles are wonderful. And what we're starting to use here are what they call single word Mi'Kmaw concepts. Nadugalim, Dan Wichis Galiadiak, which means I sprout from here, much like a flower. Now, I often tell people, okay, even in academia, and I tell students, Mi'Kmaw, as a Mi'Kmaw person, you have a cultural theory and methodology. Language is your theory, how you interpret that, how you apply the language, and use language as your methodology. Something sometimes academia hasn't quite accepted yet.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. We've got something similar. I was actually doing some research not long ago on fish traps over here and looking at the legislation that had been placed for fishing salmon in particular.
Yes.
The size of the years, when you could fish for them and all that sort of stuff. And it was going back to the 12th, 13th century. And it's so recognisable as modern concepts of fishing regulation, yet this is medieval. So it's really to see just how long that the native communities to Scotland and the Mi'Kmaws as well understood that concept of conservation, probably much more than we ever did even 50 years ago.
Here's a book of some of the earliest provincial statutes in Nova Scotia. I could open up to a chapter, fishery, and it prohibits the use of Mi'Kmaw traps, spears, etc. Mm-hmm. You're only allowed to catch 1 salmon now, and the general Mi'Kmaw response to that, how am I to feed my family on 1 salmon? Because they commercialized the industry very early. And the same with hunting moose and caribou. Now Mi'Kmaw were reduced to a state of poverty because they could only hunt 1 moose or 1 caribou annually. And you know, they definitely, like, they had a lobster crisis here, lobster fishery crisis here. Really confrontational between non-indigenous and Mi'Kmaw. Mi'Kmaw are excluded from that fishery, but the Supreme Court of Canada recognized we have a right to fish and to hunt, and validated these early treaties. So Mi'Kmaw went to participate in the fishery, and violence broke out because they wanted to prevent Mi'Kmaw from fishing. You never did it before. Well, I've excavated many shell middens, and there's a whole variety of fish species and shellfish, everything in these shell middens, right? And you know, it's just incredible. Like they've been doing it for thousands of years, right?
Yes, it's fascinating. Is there any last questions before we start to wrap up? I think we're possibly in danger of overstating our time. That's fine. Thank you very much to both of you. That was absolutely fascinating. And it's really, really interesting, especially for us on this side of the Atlantic to hear what's the kind of current research over there and the kind of methodologies and what's important to yourself, Roger, and you, Michael. And it's really, really interesting to hear. And thank you very, very much.
You're quite welcome. And like I say, thanks for the invite.
We will finish up a little bit, so I will just say if anybody is in Ullapool on the 8th, then you're more than welcome to come to the next instalment, which is an in-person event ran by Dr. Marjorie. Oh, I keep saying Taylor, and it's not. It's Harper, Marjorie Harper. And we know we're going to have a lot of Canadians over, so that should be a really, really good event there. And we will have one more right at the end of July. Date is off the top of my head. I think it might be the 27th. And Roger will be back, and so will Dr. Kehoe, as well as now Dr. Joanna Rogers and Susan Parker from the McCulloch Centre, and we will have a panel discussion on what are the next stages going forward and how we look at cultural tourism and heritage within tourism. So again, thank you very, very much for everyone who came, and we will hopefully see you all next time. We'll end it there. Thank you very much.
Bye.
Are
Bye.
we required to be here any longer?
No, you can go. Thank you very, very much, Roger. You can go.
Are we coming back?